Welcome everyone, this is Manisha. We are taking another chapter of class 12 political science, which is alternative centers of power. Let's take the overview first. The European Union and in Asia, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, have emerged as forces to reckon with. EU and the ASEAN have developed alternative institutions and conventions that build a more peaceful and cooperative regions orders and have transformed the countries in the region into prosperous economies. China and other countries emerging alternative centers of power and assess their possible role in the future. European Union. As the Second World War came to an end, many of the European leaders grappled with the question of Europe. Should Europe be allowed to revert to its rivalries or to be deconstructed on principle and institution that would contribute to a positive conception of international relations. In 1945, the European states confronted the ruin of their economies and the destruction of assumptions and structures on which Europe had been founded. European integration after 1945 was aided by the Cold War. America extended massive financial help for reviving Europe's economy under what was called Marshall Plan. The US also created a new collective security structure under NATO. Under Marshall Plan, the Organization of European Cooperation Organization OEEC was established in 1948 and channel aid to the West European states. It became forum where the Western European states began to cooperate on trade and economic issues. Council of Europe, established in 1949, was another step forward in political cooperation. European capitalist countries leading to the formation of the European Economic Community in 1957. This process acquired a political dimension with the creation of European Parliament. The collapse of Soviet bloc put Europe on a fast track and resulted in the establishment of EU in 1992. The EU has economic, political, and diplomatic and military influence. EU is the world's biggest economy with a GDP of more than $12 trillion in 2005, slightly larger than the US. EU started to act more as a nation. It has its own flag, anthem, currency, and founded date. Two members of the EU, Britain and France, hold permanent seats on the UN Security Council. The EU includes several non-permanent members of the UNSC. This has enabled the EU to influence same US policies such as current US position on Iran's nuclear programs, its use of diplomatic, economic investments and negotiation rather than coercion and military forces has been effective, as in the case of its dialogues with China on human rights and environmental degradation. Military, the EU's combined armed forces are the largest and second largest in the world. Two EU member states, Britain and France, also have nuclear arsenals and approx 550 nuclear warheads. It is also the world's second most important sources of space and communication technology. Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair was America's partner in the Iraq invasion, and many of the EU's news members made by the lead coalition of the willing. Whereas Germany and France opposed American policy, there is also a deep-seated European skepticism in some parts of Europe about the EU's integration and agenda. Association of Southeast Asian Nation ASEAN. Both European and Japanese at the end of the war, it confronted problems if nation building, the ravages of poverty and economic backwardness, and the pressure to alike with one great power or another during the Cold War. Third World unity such as the Bandung Conference and the Non-Alignment Movement were ineffective in stabilizing the Convention for Informal Cooperation and Interaction. ASEAN was established in 1967 by five countries of this region: Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. By signing the Bangkok Declaration, the objective of ASEAN is to accelerate economic growth and through that social progress and cultural development. A secondary objective was to promote regional peace and stability based on the rules of law and principle of UN Charter. Over the year, Brunei Darussalam, Vietnam, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Burma, and Cambodia joined ASEAN, taking its strength to 10. Unlike the EU, there is a little desire in ASEAN for supranational structure and institution. ASEAN countries celebrated become known as ASEAN Way, a form of interaction that is informal and non-confrontationist and cooperative. The respect for national sovereignty is critical to the functioning of ASEAN. It was all known as ASEAN Way. ASEAN broadened its objective beyond the economic and social spheres. In 2003, ASEAN moved along the path of EU by agreeing to stabilize an ASEAN community comprising three pillars: The very first pillar is known as ASEAN Security Community, second ASEAN Economic Community, and third was ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. ASEAN Security Community, the outstanding territorial dispute should not escalating into armed confrontation. Member state promised to uphold peace, neutrality, cooperation, and non-interactions and non-interference and respect for national differences and sovereign rights. The ASEAN Regional Forum (ARF), which was established in 1994, is the organization that carries out coordination of security and foreign policy. Second was ASEAN Economic Community. ASEAN region is a much smaller economy compared to the US, the EU and Japan. Its economy is growing much faster than all these. To create a common market and production base within ASEAN state to hold aid to social and economic development in the region, ASEAN dispute settlements and mechanisms to resolve economic disputes. ASEAN had forged on creating a free trade areas which was known as FTAs for investment, labor and services. ASEAN has mediated the end of the Cambodian conflict, the East Timor crisis and meets annually to discuss East Asian cooperations. Current economic strength ASEAN. Its economic relevance as a trading and investment partners to the growing ASEAN economies such as India and China makes this an attractive proportions. During Cold War year, India foreign policy did not pay adequate attention to ASEAN, but in recent years, India has tried to make amends. It signed FTAs with two Asian countries, Singapore and Thailand. The rise of Chinese economy, third majority, alternative center of power, and our immediate neighbor, China economic success since 1978 had been the fastest growing economy since the reforms first began there. The strength of its economy, together with other factors such as population, land mass, resources, region location, political influences, adds to the power in significant ways. After the inception of People's Republic of China in 1949, following the common communist revolution under the leadership of Mao, its economy was based on the Soviet model. The economically backward communist China chose to sever its links with the capitalist world. China decided to substitute imports by domestic goods. Employment and social order was assured to all citizens, and China moved ahead of most developing countries in educating its citizens and ensuring better health for them. But an annual growth of 2-3% in population meant that economic growth was insufficient to meet the needs of a growing population. China, too, its industrial production was not growing fast enough. International trade was minimal and per capita income was very low. In 1970, China ended its political and economic isolation with the establishment of its relations with the US in 1972. Premier Zhou Enlai proposed the four modernization in 1973. The very first is agriculture, second was industry, third was science, and fourth was technology. By 1978, the then leader Deng Xiaoping announced the open door policy and economic reforms in China. The policy was to generate higher productions by investment of capital and technological from abroad. Chinese did not go for shock therapy but opened their economy step by step. The privatization of industry in 1998, trade barriers were eliminated only in special economic zones seized where foreign investments could set up and enterprises in China. The state played and continues to play a central role in setting up a market economy. Privatization of agriculture led to a remarkable rise in agricultural production and rural incomes. China's economy, including both industry and agriculture, grew at a faster rate. The new trading laws and creation of special economic zones lead to a phenomenal rise in foreign trade. China has become the most important destination for foreign direct investment (FDI) anywhere in the world. Following are the economic reforms, unemployment has risen in China with nearly 100 million people looking for jobs. Second was female employment and condition of works as bad in Europe of the 18th and 19th century, and third was environmental degradation and corruption have increased besides a rise of economic inequality between rural and urban residents and coastal and inland provinces. And the very most important topic is India-China relations. India and China were great powers in Asia before the advent of Western imperialism. At different time in China's long history of dynamism rules, Mongolia's Korea's part of Indochina, Tibet accepted China's authority. Various kingdoms and empires in India also extended their influence was political, economic, and cultural. In the 20th century, when nations confrontations each other, they had some differently involving a foreign policy to deal with each other. After India's regioning regained its independence from Britain and from China, expelled the foreign power, there was hope that both would come together to shape the future of the developing world and of Asia particularly. For a brief, the slogan of Hindu Chini Bhai Bhai was popular. Military conflicts over a border dispute between the two countries marred that hope. Differences arising from the Chinese takeover of Tibet in 1950 and final settlements of the Sino-Tibetan and Indian border, China and India were involved in a border conflict in 1962 over competing territorial claims, principally in Arunachal Pradesh and in the Aksai Chin region of Ladakh. The conflict of 1962, in which India suffered military reverses, had long-term implications for India-China relations. Diplomatic relations between two countries were downgraded until 1970. China's policy became more pragmatic and less ideological. A series of talks to resolve the border issues were also initiated in 1981. Relations now have a strategic as well as a economic dimension, rising powers in global politics, and both would like to play a per major role in Asia economic and politics. Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China in December 1988 provided the impetus for an improvement in India-China relations. Government contains conflicts and maintain peace and trans-equality on the borders. They have also signed agreements on cultural exchanges and cooperation in science and technology, and opened 4 border posts for trade, with India-China trade growing at 30% year 1999. A more positive perspective on relations with China has emerged. At the global level, India and China adopted policies in international economic institutions like the World Trade Organization. One sign of this is that the talk of resolve the boundary question have continued without interruptions, and military-to-military cooperations in increasing. India and China, Indian and China leaders and officials visit Beijing and New Delhi with greater frequently, and both sides are now becoming more familiar with each other. Increasing transportation and communication links, common economic interests, and global concerns should help establish a more positive and sound relations between the two most populous countries of the world. With this, we have come to an end of this chapter. I hope you found this video informative. Till then, catch